Matt, it's so good to see you, man.
It is great to see you too.
Thanks for coming out here and visiting me here. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, it has been a couple of years. Right?
Dude, you look amazing. Your hair looks awesome.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, for people probably not watching, 2 points. Firstly, you should probably not believe anything I say if I have a haircut like this. And number two, clearly no one told me that the pandemic was over.
Yeah.
You can get your haircut, you know?
Yeah.
So I just had a moment. And
I love it, dude. I love it.
Here it is.
It looks great. It looks amazing.
I'll go with it for a while.
I've threatened, probably my wife mostly, that a couple times I've tried to grow my hair out, and there's that awkward stage you got to get through.
I went through it.
Yeah. And it looks so bad. And it's like, if you can't get through that, I couldn't get through it. But you clearly got through it.
That period, I think someone at the gym, they came up to me and they said, you know what? You look like an older version of Kurt Cobain.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, you know what? You were so close with the compliment.
Right.
If you'd just gone to the end part, I would have loved you.
Oh, 100%.
It was the older part that really just stuck the knife in. So anyway, I'm going with it.
Well, awesome.
You need to, in a couple of years' time it won't be that long before I see you next, but go for it.
Go for it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I got a lot of gray though. So it would be like a gray long hair
What do they call it now? Someone told me the other, silver fox.
That's right. And I'd have to do like a man bun thing. Anyway, we're getting off topic. We haven't started on topic.
Sleep. Yeah.
So,
not her.
So Matt, like, let's set the stage here. I mean, obviously you've been on the podcast before, but for those that haven't heard, a professor of neuroscience and psychology at the University of California, Berkeley.
Yeah.
Good old Berkeley. You're also the founder and director of the Center for Human Sleep Science, and you have a podcast, which I highly recommend going and checking out, the Matt Walker podcast. Congrats on launching that. It's been maybe over a year now?
It's probably getting close to 2 years now.
Wow,
and I think we've dropped about 70 episodes, and they're a little different for folks listening. They are mostly shorter monologues from yours truly that hit specific topics, and it's essentially a little bit of a bite-sized piece of sleep goodness to accompany your waking day.
Yes.
Usually lasting between about 15 to 30 minutes rather than necessarily the interview interaction itself. So people can check that out. Covers probably what most would want to explore, but I'm always looking for new topics. So if people are listening, hit me up. I will record some content for you. Yeah,
fantastic. And it's obviously on all the major platforms, Spotify, all over the place.
It is indeed. Matt Walker. Unfortunately for people's ears, I will abuse them with this disastrous voice. So.
The accent always goes a long way. So, all right, so let's get started here. Lots of stuff since we last caught up. I have a ton of questions for you. Science, as we know, is just always evolving. And you wrote a book about sleep that was a huge hit. Scared the crap out of me personally. There was a lot of scary.
I had that from a lot of people.
There's a lot of scary things in there. But I'm really curious. Like, the book's been out for a while now. What do we know now that is either debunked from that book or has changed science-wise? Because those are hard books to write.
Yeah.
Because things will change in your understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
What has changed?
I would say, I think I've probably changed my stance firstly on caffeine a little bit. Back then firstly, when I came out the gate with this whole sleep thing, I was far too dictatorial. I was a disaster in terms of a public communicator because it was very much, I think someone said my TED talk should have been called Sleep or Else ...
Right.
It's gonna
Alzheimer's exactly.
Had one bad night of sleep and basically I should, get my estate in order and say goodbye to my mum because that's it. I think I was very, opinionated on caffeine in terms of it's just no good. No way that you look at it, it's just not going to help your sleep.
Yeah.
Now I think that the more measured approach is twofold. Firstly, the dose and the timing make the poison.
Yes.
Second, there was this really strange correlation where drinking coffee was associated with remarkable health benefits. And sleep was associated with, drumroll, remarkable health benefits.
There was like liver protection on the caffeine side. There's a few other things.
When you do the Venn diagram overlap, they're almost homologs for each other. So people said, I don't get it, Matt. You're saying that caffeine is bad for sleep, but yet they seem to transact almost the same health benefits. Go and square that circle for me because I can't figure it out. If you look at the data, however, it's not that caffeine itself is health promoting. It's that the coffee bean contains a whopping dose of antioxidants. And because we're so deficient in our antioxidant needs, because we are not eating enough whole food supplies in these days, the coffee bean has been asked to carry the Herculean weight of all of our antioxidant needs. And therefore, no wonder drinking coffee looks like it's linked to health benefits.
Right.
Case in point, if you look at the health benefits of decaffeinated coffee, they're very similar.
Yeah.
So it's not the caffeine. So now I would say, first, I advocate for drink coffee. Try to limit it to about 3 cups-ish. So that's the dose. And then try to cut yourself off, depending on your rate of clearance, I would say on average about 10 hours before you expect to go to sleep. It's not a bad rule of thumb.
How would one, I mean, obviously we can, half-life seems like on caffeine metabolism is going to be a little bit different for everyone. There's some genetics.
Variance.
Yeah, because I mean, I literally, we all know this. We know somebody that can like have after dinner latte, you know, or a cappuccino or espresso, right? And it's 8:30 at night, and then they're lights out by 10.
Yeah.
What the hell is going on there?
Isn't it impressive?
It's very, I wish I had it.
Yeah, I have, because I'm a caffeine sensitive person. So first, most of us with an asterisk will know what general sensitivity we are. Does it completely deconstruct my sleep or not? You can do a genetic test, and the different kits out there will tell you if you're slow or
so there's a
fast.
SNP that's
so
out
there
there.
is a SNP, and we know it's it comes onto an enzyme, a liver enzyme, and it's a cytochrome P450 enzyme, and I think it's the CYPA1, and I probably got that wrong. Correct me in the comments, but don't worry about that. You can just essentially, you know, subjectively guesstimate it. The range is remarkable. The average adult will have a half-life of caffeine timeline of about 5 to 6 hours. So in other words, after 5 to 6 hours, half of that caffeine is still swilling in your brain. Which means it has a quarter life of 10 to 12 hours.
People get that confused all the time because they think, oh, half-life 5 to 6 hours. That means it's cleared by 10 or 11 hours. And that's not it. We have to play the half-life game yet again.
Correct.
Because so for the next, there's another half-life, then another half-life.
And it just goes. And so, you know, think about, you know, grabbing a quarter of a cup of coffee just before you took yourself in.
Yes.
And then you think, why is my sleep not ideal?
Right.
Could be the reason that because you had a coffee at noon, and it's the equivalent of taking a quarter of a cup of coffee just before bed. So keep that in mind. The range, however, the published ranges go from as little as about 2 hours and 45 minutes. So some people have a half-life of caffeine, not of 5 to 6 hours, but they can clear 50% of it within less than 3 hours.
That's
within
crazy.
You know, less than half the time. Others will have a half-life somewhere around about 12 to 14 hours. Those are the people who, you know, if they have one in the morning, geez, don't even look at another cup of coffee for the rest of the day.
You know, I'm the type that if I have a second cup anytime past 10 a.m., I'm going to have a late turn in. You know,
and what time is your typical bedtime?
I would like to be lights out, like asleep by 10:30.
Okay.
But like I would say then that means 11:30, and then sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, look, it's midnight now, you know, which is a bummer.
You give yourself a nice kind of 10 to 12 hour window.
Yeah.
So assuming, you know, somewhere in that middle of the distribution, you're going to be just fine.
Yeah.
So I would say I've changed my tune on coffee a little bit.
Can you say when you change your tune, or you change your tune in terms of you realize the antioxidant benefits of coffee, so that's why you've changed your tune? Or
Correct.
So you're not loving the caffeine side still?
I think if you look at the data in terms of performance enhancement, yes, in caffeine naive users, when you dose them with caffeine, they get some great cognitive benefits.
Right.
But what happens over time is that your system quickly adapts to the caffeine. And then what you perceive as your caffeine benefit in the morning is simply you coming out of withdrawal. So you're not any better. You're not limitless, cognitively enhanced.
You're just getting back to baseline.
Just getting back to baseline.
Yeah.
And gradually over time, we mistake the former for the latter. And it's a conflation caused by the essentially the body adapting to the
I don't mistake it. Every day I know I'm getting back to baseline. I'm like, bring me back.
Yeah. So I would say that's definitely one of those areas.
Anything we can take to speed up the metabolism after, like if you're like, crap, like I drank a little too much today, can I sprint it off? Is there anything that we know of that helps that exit?
Not to enhance the exit. Most people then, if you look at society, and we just published a study in Wall Street Traders, and we did a 2-week continuous tracking of them, and they essentially have it's an uppers and downers profile. So they will be hammering caffeine during the day as they're working on the markets and trading.
Right.
And then because they're so wired at night, there is nothing to essentially, dissolve it very quickly.
Right.
What they do then is self-medicate with alcohol, which is a sedative.
Right.
And then when they wake up the next morning, because they've had such bad sleep because of the alcohol, they're reaching for now 7 cups of coffee rather than the 5 that were keeping them going.
They're going and 7 deep?
It was stunning.
When you say coffee is so variable, it's like for me, every morning I take 23 grams of whole beans and grind them and do a pour over because I'm that kind of geek when it comes to that stuff. Like I like the single origin, good stuff. You know, when you're studying coffee in general, are you thinking like 7-Eleven kind of pull the handle kind of coffee? Like how do you figure out caffeine?
Yeah, so that's one of those places where there's just such limited data.
Yeah.
Which is
so much variability by bean type too,
cold
right?
Or is it, exactly.
Yeah.
How has it been brewed? What are the beans? Is it, a light roast? Is it a dark roast? You would think the dark would have more caffeine. It's usually the opposite. The lighter roast actually has more caffeine in it. So huge amounts of variability. This is just simply saying, how many cups of coffee did you have? Completely blunt instrument, but we do see a fairly predictable correlation between on days where they're drinking more caffeine, sleep is demonstrably worse, demonstratively worse.
Yes.
And that usually leads to then a self-medicating of the downers in the evening.
I've been there.
Alcohol. And the cycle just continues and you get locked into it. So I would,
How would you recommend someone, is it just titrating off of caffeine slowly over time when you think about people wanting to break that cycle?
Yeah. You can go cold turkey.
I don't want to do that.
Depending on how strong, and it is miserable. You will probably fall off the wagon and you will lose your abstinence very quickly because of the headaches. I would say just gradually ramp it down. Try not to signal to your brain that you're in a state of privation with the number of cups that you're having. Simply just start to mix in some decaffeinated.
Wise.
And gradually, so your brain still thinks, well, I've had my 4 cups of coffee today.
Right.
First one, full on. Second one, maybe half and half. And here I'm talking half and half split between caffeinated, decaffeinated.
Right.
Same with the third one. And then the fourth one, maybe just move into decaffeinated.
Yes.
And then gradually titrate yourself back and back. Probably a better way, both physiologically, but also psychologically.
Yes. Okay.
Does that make some sense?
It totally makes sense. But also I've done this with and subbed out tea in this regard. So I've done green tea instead. What are your thoughts on tea? I know the caffeine content can be a little bit less, depends on how oxidized the tea is, it ranges. There's also L-theanine in tea. There's also, ECGC in there as well.
That's right.
So is that better for us in general for sleep?
If you look at the data, and again, this is where they're agnostic to type of tea, which can be a huge factor, but this is where we're at. I mean, no one's funding that kind of science.
Did I ever tell you I was a certified tea master?
Are you really?
Yeah, I took like years of training to become a certified tea master. I have a tattoo of Shenong, the man that discovered tea, inside of my arm right here. Yeah, so we could talk all day about tea. I'm happy.
Okay, we should
geek out upstairs.
We should absolutely geek out. This is bloody fascinating. Okay, learning so much more about Kevin, as we all are, folks listening. So I would say that if you look at the data, tea does not seem to have anywhere near the blast radius that caffeine by way of coffee seems to do. Largely, I think, just because of a kind of dose per serving caffeine dose per serving volume. If you were to match the caffeine, I think you're going to get the same, for the most part, sleep effects.
Do you think L-theanine helps offset that a bit? Because that is a more of a kind of relaxing, chilling. It's also used in sleep supplements at times.
It is. And there's a little bit of data that does support L-theanine for sleep supplementation. We can talk about that later. It can take the edge off, I think, some of that, you don't get the jitteriness. That's right. Yeah. But I would say it's no solid data, certainly no randomized control trials that we can look at. But I would try it, see if you think it provides some degree of pacification while still giving you the cognitive focus that you are kind of trying to game the system for. If you do, great.
Yeah. I'll tell you a hack that I've heard about. I haven't seen it backed up with any published papers, but I know many tea drinkers have told me about this, like professional tea folks. If you take, tea can be steeped multiple times, like high quality leaves, not like the tea bags, but like real whole leaf like teas. If you take the first steeping and you just throw it away, pour it out, apparently 80% of the caffeine is released in the first release of the steeping. So if let's just say you're like, okay, it's early afternoon, I want a cup of oolong, but I don't want that caffeine.
Genius.
Steep it, pour it out, do the second steeping. You can still get the same flavor profile and way less caffeine. So
now, what's the etiquette regarding you steep for the first brew, let's say in the morning?
Yeah.
Can you then go cold, steep the second time at midday for that second round, essentially deconcentrated version?
Yeah.
Or is it simply just,
No, you'd be fine.
You'd be fine.
It depends on the leaf.
Okay,
I mean,
go sort of cold and then
you can let it go cold. That's fine.
Okay.
I would say that it depends on how delicate the leaves are. I mean, there's some teas like a Dragon Well, which is a pan fried like flat tea that is, or a really fine sencha or something like that, where you just don't want the leaves because they kind of don't have a lot of integrity already. They're very thin, very needle-like, and they probably get a little mushy at that point.
Yeah.
Whereas an oolong, you actually don't see the full leaf expand completely until the third or fourth steeping. So it's going to be tightly ball kind of round tea.
Right.
And so, it can really, it has a lot of integrity to it and it can hold up to multiple steepings. So it depends on the tea. But yeah, you can absolutely do that. You could have that first cup, let it sit there, and then come back. I've done that many times. Come back 3 hours later, pour some more hot water on it, and you're good to go.
It's a 2-for-1.
Yeah,
because you're doing what you said, which is trying to protect some degree of sleep in the future, but also you're saving some money too, because these things can sometimes not be the most inexpensive of.
Yeah. So when I was in the middle of China, in the Yunnan province, in the middle of nowhere, I was working and kind of making my own what's called pu'er, which is a fermented tea cakes that are out in the middle of nowhere out there. And I was working with some of the tea masters on their farms. And what they would do is they would actually break off a big chunk of pu'er tea, and they would put it in these vessels, like these kind of, like the double pane glass insulated vessels that really keep heat in. Yeah. And they would let it all fall to the bottom. They would have a little screen at the top, and so they could just drink through and leave the leaves in all day long. Because unlike some other teas, mostly greens, that get really that kind of astringent, kind of like if you oversteep them, that bad taste you don't want to have. Yep. Pu'er, you can steep multiple times, so many times. So what they would do is they would leave it in their vessel and literally add and steep it 15 times throughout the day. And so by the end of the day, there's no caffeine coming out of that at all, but you're still getting some of that flavor. Yeah. And so there's a natural kind of degradation in caffeine, and you're still getting a great drink all day long, which is kind of cool. Yeah. So that's another little fun hack.
Yeah, I would say probably, coffee in general is one of those things that I've changed my mind on. In terms of new stuff that's come out since the book, so much. I would say probably the ability to potentially predict what people are dreaming using brain scanners. Scary.
Whoa.
I think the second thing would be...
Wait, in that it's gotten better?
Yeah, a lot better.
Predict ahead of time?
Yes, using machine learning. I think the second kind of...
What the fuck?
Wait,
you got to go deep there. Hold on.
Yeah, let me give you... I'll throw spaghetti against the wall. You tell me what you want to dive into. One is the prediction of mostly what someone's dreaming. The second is the definitive scientific proof that lucid dreaming is actually real. And we've struggled with that with sleep science for a long time. Also in the dreaming realm, gosh, I'm coming up with 3 dreaming ones, and I'll come up with a 4th that's not, is the idea that we can actually create a clinical therapy for nightmares, whereas before we could never do that. Wow. And we now have something like that, and I'd love to double click on that too. The final thing, which probably we may get to later, is to speak about sleep augmentation. So for the first time, we can actually augment and enhance human sleep without pharmacology. And I think this is one of the most exciting.
That's on my
areas.
list of things to talk about.
So we'll come back to that. But anything there that is of vague interest, you tell me.
How much time do you got? Like, this is very cool. So
all night, says the sleep researcher.
Let's talk about the predicting of dreams. So I would love for you to just go into that. But first, I just want to say, for me, sometimes, and I've heard this from many people, dreams can be triggers from ordinary life, right? Like, for example, a passing of someone passes away that's near and dear to you. They can make reoccurrences in your dreams, shortly after their passing. Like that is a known thing that people report.
It's very reliable.
Yeah. So what do we know about the interaction between daily life and dreams? And then how does that play into the prediction side?
That's a great question. What we've known for a while now is that during dreaming, we do not simply rewind the videotape of the waking day and replay it. If you look at how much of the waking day is actually replayed at night, it's probably less than 5% is a veridical replay, as if we just kind of, we were YouTube streaming all day of our lives, and then we just go back and we now compress it ×2 speed. We do it in 8 hours versus the 16 we were awake. No, that doesn't happen. However, the 2 things that are ultra reliable in terms of red thread narratives that run from our waking life into our dreaming life: emotional concerns, people of significance. And usually those 2 things are very coupled together, of course. That is, if there is a Da Vinci red thread sort of that almost bleeds through from your waking life into your dreaming life. And that has pointed us to now some great scientific studies, and we've done a lot of work in this area too. What is the function of dreaming? Not just REM sleep, because most of what we think of as dreaming comes from a stage of sleep that we call REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep. Now, there are lots of functions of REM sleep, things like regulating your body temperature and getting you ready for the day. Nothing to do with the mental activity of dreaming. The release of testosterone. Males and females release their peak levels of testosterone during REM sleep, another physiological component that we don't think is reflected in dreams. So then how can you show me that it's not just REM sleep that has a function, or that dreaming per se has a function, but what you dream about is meaningful rather than epiphenomenal? And what I mean by that is, think of a light bulb. A light bulb is designed to produce light. It turns out that when you touch a light bulb, or at least an old light bulb, it would be very warm.
Right.
And the purpose of the light bulb was never to create heat. It's just what happens as an epiphenomenon of creating light in that way.
Right.
And so too could be dreaming, that whenever we create this physiological state called REM sleep, for all of its functions that we've just spoken about, you also get this byproduct called dreaming. And it's completely epiphenomenal. It's just like the redness of your blood. It's useless, absolutely, makes no functional benefit for your body. Now, we use it in medicine now, the redness, but that aside. But studies then pointed us to say, there is something going on about what it is you're dreaming that interrelates to what it is you're emotionally going through. And we've since proven that not just dreaming, but dreaming of certain things gifts you emotional resolution. In other words, one of the functions of dreaming is overnight therapy. It is emotional first aid. And it's during our dream state, and I can explain, we put forward a theory, and we've got now some nice data for this biologically as to why it is dreaming is so good at doing this. Dreaming takes those emotional, difficult experiences, and it almost acts like a nocturnal soothing balm that just sort of takes the sharp edges off those difficult, painful experiences, so that we come back the next day or several weeks later, and now we have a memory of an emotional event, but it's no longer emotional itself because dream sleep has essentially detoxed the emotion from the memory. It's a little bit like stripping the bitter rind from the informational orange. The bitter rind is the emotional wrapper that said to your brain at the time of learning, okay, this experience, this was important. And your brain uses emotion in that way to prioritize and red flag memories to say, give these priority, make sure that these are remembered. But after that event, it's not adaptive to hold on to the emotion anymore.
Right.
So the brain holds on to the information of the salient experience, but then lets go of the emotion. And what gives us that ability to essentially divorce the emotion from the memory is dreaming.
Fascinating.
And so, so that's...
this is so cool. So hold on. I got a couple things I want to comment on. This will explain TMJ then as well. People that clench their jaws at night.
Correct.
They're going through something very emotional. They're having something that does TMJ happen during REM sleep, during dreaming?
We will see it during both REM and non-REM, but certainly you can see these very strong muscular pulses. You'll also see it in hands twitching. If you've got a dog, you'll sort of, when they go into REM sleep, you'll almost these kind of twitches. And then at one point they will start they'll look like they're running.
Yes.
That normally, by the way, only happens in dogs who are older and more so males than females. Same thing in humans. And what happens during REM sleep when we are younger, both dogs and humans, and it's seemingly all mammalian species, is that when we go into dream sleep, our brain paralyzes our body. You are locked into a physical state of incarceration, that there is a signal sent down your spinal cord to something called your alpha motor neurons, and they control all of your voluntary skeletal muscles. Bang, you'll go into paralysis. And in fact, if I'm looking at the muscle activity in my sleep laboratory, if we were to bring you up and do a sleep recording, just before you go into REM sleep, your muscle tone is still quite high. Now, you're lying in bed and you're relaxed, but there's still a sort of this voluminous tone to your muscles. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking at the trace, bang, it just goes flat. And you are locked into this physical, what we call muscle atonia. You're paralyzed.
It's almost a disassociative kind of, so I have an episode coming on after yours here soon with a doctor around ketamine. And ketamine is very much like a dream state when it's used in a therapeutic setting. And you're describing a lot of very similar things here.
Correct.
The ability to look and see something in a dreamlike state, process it, let it go, release, and come back,
And I don't think it's consequential or inconsequential that both of those states, ketamine-induced brain states, and also the dreaming state, are now linked to aspects of mental health and mental wellness. And so coming back to the paralysis and the dog, as we get older, unfortunately, the brainstem center that sends that signal down the spinal cord to say, you're going into REM sleep, paralyzed. And by the way, the reason this happens, of course, is your mind essentially can dream safely without you acting out your dreams. If you think that you can fly and you're living up in an apartment block, probably a bad idea to try to enact that out. You'll be popped out the gene pool rather quickly in that regard. So you get paralyzed. And as we age, that part of the brainstem starts to degrade. The signal gets a little bit lossy in terms of its sort of significance.
Yeah.
And therefore, we can start to act out their dreams. In males, usually over the age of 50 or 60, we have a disorder name for it. It's called REM sleep behavioral disorder, acting out your dreams. This is not sleepwalking or sleep talking. That's very, very different.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the diagnosis of REM sleep behavioral disorder significantly increases one's chances of Parkinson's disease. Now, it is not a deterministic thing, meaning if you have REM sleep behavioral disorder, it doesn't mean that in 15 or 20 years' time, you will definitively get, not at all. It's just probabilistic, but it can increase that risk by 50 to 60%.
Wow.
So at that point, since we don't have many effective wholesale treatments for Parkinson's, we'll often just work with the patient to try to help to see if we can continuously track some of their Parkinson's symptomatology and intervene as early as possible.
Yeah. Wow. So many questions here. One, to loop back real quick on the TMJ thing, because I know a lot of people suffer from that, like extreme pain from clenching their teeth at night.
Yeah.
You see it just before going into REM, then you're frozen, right? So you're not going to see a lot of it during actual REM.
Correct. Yeah, because that is a voluntary skeletal muscle. Yeah.
Exactly. So what does your gut tell you is happening during that stage of sleep that is causing TMJ?
So right now, you will get these huge bursts of motor activity from the motor cortex that are essentially instigating all of your fictive movements in the dream state, because we're moving a great deal.
Yeah.
And some of that particularly if you're stressed, that's a time, or you're anxious, we typically see higher rates of that mandibular sort of clenching and the rates too. However, as I said, it's not exclusive to REM sleep. We also see it in deep non-REM sleep as well. So I think it's probably got a little bit less to do with the paralysis mechanisms of REM sleep as it is to do with this automatic state of the brain that when you are stressed and anxious, there is still a remnant. There's still kind of a ghost in the machine, as it were. And that ghost is anxiety, which still causes. And I don't think it's necessarily that people are doing it because that's what they do during the day. They're sort of tense and they don't typically do that when they're stressed either. I think it's just the expression in terms of muscularity plays out most definitively at the level of the jaw, and we have no idea why. But that's where it seems to, if the pressure valve pops, that's muscularly where it seems to happen.
So you haven't seen any data around increases in cortisol levels or anything that might be causal for, like compounds that might be causal for what?
For TMJ, not that I've seen so far.
Okay.
That data could be out there. I just don't know of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned, this idea of being able to stop nightmares clinically. That's fascinating. Then I want to get back to the maybe we should start with the dream prediction stuff, like before we get there. So what's up with the prediction stuff?
It was a great study by a Japanese team, and there are probably several studies in the literature that when I look at them, or if I were the reviewer, the first thing, my reaction to them was, I am so jealous. And the worst, most shameful reaction, because I just thought, this is such a brilliant study, and I wish I thought of it myself. And then I let it go because I'm way too old to have that kind of hubris. And then I usually say, it's a fantastic study, we should publish it, just do these things. Here's what they did. They took people who were awake, and they put them inside of a brain scanner, and they started to show them lots of different categories of objects. So cars, houses, men, women, dogs, sports equipment, you name it. And they saw hundreds of these images in distinct categories. All the time, the researchers were scanning their brains. And then the researchers used those categorical trials. Now, they were seeing, a soccer ball here, football for me, a football here. Then they were seeing, a woman on the street here. Then they were seeing a house here. So all of these categories were all jumbled up. They're all single trials. But then you can use machine learning, and the brain scans themselves. And you can go back and say, okay, for category A, let's call it sports equipment, what is it? What's the pattern of brain activity? Show me the signature of parts of the brain they're lighting up. Okay, now for females, show me that signature, and it's different. And then show me it for sports cars. Okay, it's different too. Excellent. So now we've got definitive for each individual. I've got Kevin Rose's distinct brain map of sports cars. Mention it because I think we both have the same predilection. So there it is. There's that category signature of brain activity. Now what they did was put those participants back at a later point inside of the scanner, and then they just had them sleep. And when they went into REM sleep, they started scanning their brain. Excellent. So now we've got dream sleep brain data. Then they woke those individuals up, and one group of the scientists in the team took dream reports from them. The other half of the experimenters, who were essentially blind to that, So now you've got essentially what the dream contained from each of the, so you've got ground truth experientially of what these people dreamt about. But then the other half of the research team went back and they just used these templates that they created from waking brain activity truth, and they went searching. So it's a little bit like a forensics DNA scene.
Right.
You've got this segment of DNA and you're just going to go around the scene and see if you can find a match. And for the, let's say it's the male category, they didn't find a match. For the houses category, they didn't find a match. But for the sports equipment, they did. For the females, they did. For the sports cars, they did. So all of a sudden, what they were able to do with high statistical accuracy was predict the content of the dreams of those individuals, without even knowing what it is that those individuals said that they dreamt. They could tell just from the brain scans. And the more frightening part was, even before they woke up and reported that dream, the scientists from the data could already tell what they dreamt about. But here's the little sleight of hand that I've just made. I can predict what it was that you were dreaming, but I can't predict the precise content. So was it a Porsche GT3 RS, or was it a classic Aston Martin in terms of the sports car? We're not at that level yet. So I can't definitively say, okay, you, Kevin Rose, you were dreaming about a female.
Right.
I can't really tell which female, which, ethically, lots of people may prefer at this stage. But we're getting ever closer to essentially not just mind reading with brain scans, but dream reading. And that brings up a huge ethical concern, because for two reasons. Once, my dreams were my own, no one else's. They were ownership of me.
Right.
Now, of course, they consented to the study, but that's debatable. The second is, dreams, for the most part, unless you're lucid, are involuntary. I don't get to decide what it is that I dreamt about.
Right.
Now, let's say I dreamt about doing something terrible to someone, that I would wake up and I'd be shocked at myself. But now, all of a sudden, if people were able to stick a cap on and read out, your partner comes through in the morning and they're looking at their iPad and saying, look, I can't believe what you dreamed about last night. And now
the fidelity for that, though, is going to be so many years out.
But, what we've realized is that the fidelity for so many things in AI and machine learning has ramped to a surprising degree beyond our expectations. So that was the study. So I will stop there because I won't rant any further. But.
So curious, when they read the brains and they saw the sports cars, let's say, was that applicable across individuals or just for that person? Meaning, did everyone's brain light up in the same region?
There was a lot of overlap.
Okay.
But what they were clever to do, and this is what sort of machine learning does, is it gives you the ability to create bespoke brain templates for each individual.
Right. So there had to be a calibration period. You couldn't just walk in and put on a cap and be like, oh, that's a sports car.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because it's not quite that. Now, there may be genericness inherent across so many people for sports car brain dream activity that we'll get there in the end. But what they wanted to do was go out the gate strong and say, look, if you and I are both going to Savile Row and we're going to get a suit tailored, your suit sort of dimensions are going to be, not dissimilar to mine, but not the same as mine. And so as a consequence, that's what they were trying to do. They were really trying to get individual, unique snowflake specific. And that gave them the greatest statistical power, if that makes any sense.
Yes. So I know that there's been in the past kind of these benchmarks for what we want to hit in terms of minutes of deep versus REM versus light, to have a quote unquote great night's sleep, right?
Yeah.
Are we leaning more towards also potentially content-based benchmarks for high-quality sleep? Could it go there? Or
you should come and do a sabbatical. So there was an abstract published probably about a year ago from the MIT Media Lab. They did something genius with machine learning. They got individuals to report their dreams day after day after day. And they were also reporting, okay, how did I feel the quality of my sleep was last night in terms of my waking day function? And then using some clever machine learning, they ripped through all of the dream reports and they tried to say, is there anything about
that's what I was curious about.
The informational content of what you report that you were dreaming about that predicts the degree of sleep quality and or waking day restoration caused by that prior night of sleep?
Yes.
Lo and behold, number one, yes. Number two, what were the things more specifically in the dream itself that were most predictive of the degree of feeling of restoration? The emotionality of it and the emotional components of it would predict better feeling better.
Less emotion, more emotion, sad emotion, happy emotion. Like, how did we break that apart?
Yeah, it seemed to be just the more emotionally relevant content to that individual, the greater essentially the emotional resolution you were getting from your sleep, which gave you a better subjective feeling the next day.
What would you classify? Give me a concrete example of something you classify as emotionally relevant material.
So let's say that I was coming here to now. You and I, we are very relaxed together, friends, and so I wouldn't have been stressed by coming to this. But let's say that last night, I was going to do someone else's podcast and I didn't know what our chemistry was like. And I knew that it was usually an adversarial type of interviewing and it was kind of a gotcha program and stupidly. Now there, I probably would have been dreaming about some scenario where I come in, they say, we've suggested that we were going to cover these sort of topics. We've chosen to do a completely different set. And we're also going to focus on, two recent studies that seem to debunk two classic theories in sleep science. And in fact, we've got one of the authors here on the phone and we're going to,
right.
That was my dream. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is, how are you going to weather this storm? That would be one of those things where, firstly, that's a sort of me trying to deal with the anxiety the next day. And if I go through it, and I come up with a resolution and I think, it wasn't so bad. In fact, people ended up thinking it was a really useful debate and we were constructive in the end and everyone was friendly. And I just feel better about, the upcoming events and I feel better about the waking day as a consequence.
Okay. But if you had more of a quote unquote nightmare version of that, where it's like things didn't go well, it was still a very emotionally intense dream. You wake up, wouldn't you say that? Because I've had these moments where high anxiety, lots going on, and I had a horrible night's sleep. Mostly probably because I was not actually I was probably having a lot of micro waking moments and other things that were going on. So it can backfire.
It can backfire if it's too high. And so I think everyone has had the experience where you've got to wake up for an early morning flight. You've got a 6:45 a.m. flight. And you've got to wake up.
And you just cannot fall asleep.
5:45.
Yes.
Firstly, you cannot fall asleep.
Yes. And then you wake up just before the alarm too.
Isn't that freaky?
Yeah, I know.
That my alarm is set for 5:45 and I wake up at 5:43 and I am awake.
Yes.
Normally I don't wake up until about 7:30, but boy, am I wired. Forget the espresso. I'm ready to go. But what we know is that type of what we call anticipatory anxiety produces much more shallow sleep across the night. And the reason I bring this up is because we all baggage ourselves with a diluted low-level version of anticipatory anxiety every single night.
Right.
And it's called our phone in the bedroom.
Yes.
What most people do, and I've been guilty of this before too, the first thing you do when you wake up, what is it that we do? We don't sort of get out of bed. We don't do breathing exercises. We don't go and brush our teeth. First thing we do, we swipe the phone open and this tsunami of the world just hits you.
Yes.
And you essentially are training your brain to have an anticipatory anxiety event every single morning.
Yes.
Now, it's a low-grade version of the morning
right.
flight, but it's one of those nonetheless. And there's good data that it will dissipate the quality of that deep sleep in a non-trivial amount.
Wait, it'll dissipate even though
it decreases the amount of deep sleep that you get.
The night that you're about to...
Correct. Yeah, because you're in this kind of like shallow state. And your brain almost, it's almost as though your brain is on guard. Where it's just saying, you know what, I don't think I can let Kevin go too deep in terms of his sleep tonight.
Okay.
I'm just going to keep him in this shallow state because there is anxiety afoot. I know it's happening in the
So
morning.
it's a micro anxiety of like, okay, let me give you an example. Like some horrible war has broken out. It might be there and it's going to be right next to my bed when I wake up in the morning, right? Because I'm going to like open it up and I'm going to see that first thing.
Yeah.
Subconsciously somewhere there's a micro anxiety of having the device and that information so readily available that close to me.
Correct.
That is creating
expectation. You just think, okay, every morning.
So phone in the other room.
Phone in the other room.
Do you have like a 1 hour no touch policy in the morning?
That genie of technology is out the bottle and it's not going back in, however much I protest. I wish it would too. But I think the thing is, try to create just guardrails, boundary conditions. Do the experiment for me for just 1 week. For 15 minutes after you've woken up, try not to use your phone. Just 15 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, that's all you have to do. So as soon as you finish like brushing your teeth or whatever it is, as soon as you finish going through to the kitchen, turning on the coffee pot or the kettle, or, you know, then when you start brushing your teeth, okay, then open your phone. Just don't do it first thing in the morning, because your brain, your prefrontal cortex, like a classic car engine, it's not even up to temperature right now. So you become incredibly limbic in terms of your kind of Neanderthal brain reactions. And you can get one of those emails that says, you know, oh my God, Kevin, you know, on this, the deal that we made just today, there's a huge legal error. And all of a sudden, you know, your eyes aren't half open and you shoot it and you hit the email. That's going to be a very different email than the email that you would send just 30 minutes later. So you're giving yourself the prefrontal cortex chance to get back online.
Couldn't agree more. A couple hacks I have on that front is that Apple has these screen time features now built into iOS. Android has something similar. I give myself a hard fixed 30 minutes on Instagram every day. And I hit the limit and then I'm done. And then I'm done. And you can also say time of day as well. So you could say like, don't allow me to use this before, you know? And so it's like, for me, that'd probably be like, don't check the stock market or something like that, you know, like one of those apps. But like there's, I think putting those guardrails in place, and even if you have to override it one day, you know, because there is a button to do it.
That's completely fine.
But it's just enough to give you to like,
I would ask most people for most of the time, when have you ever woken up and absolutely non-negotiably needed to do something on the phone within 15 minutes of first waking up? And just be honest with yourself. We can all probably name that one event. That
every 3 years
ago.
Exactly.
So, you know, is it really worth? And even then, you know, if it was just 15 minutes later that you responded, would that have made a world of difference? Probably not as much as you think. So it's just not worth it for your sanity.
100% agree. Okay, so let's keep moving. I got a bunch of great stuff on here.
I'll be much more quick with my responses.
No, these are
rapid fire the next hour.
No, this is great. I love it. So, you know, obviously your job is to dream up these experiments, these crazy ideas, like these what if scenarios. You're dependent upon funding. A lot of these you have to write grants for. There's people that get to say yes or no, thumbs up or thumbs down. And, you know, the wilder stuff sometimes can get the thumbs down. And it's a shame, because it's some of the more risky science that I actually think like, gosh, we should be doing that, when it seems like sometimes playing it safe is an easier way to get approval for some of these things.
That's right.
Is that true in your realm of?
It is. Very much true. Now, I think NIH does a fantastic job of trying to distribute their funds in a disease-specific related manner.
Yes.
But we also know that there are these things called blue sky research projects. And I mean, you could go as a technology historian, you could go all the way back and you could look at, you know, blue sky basic research that only 20 years later created a revolution in technology. And for 20 years, it just seemed to be a waste of blue sky dormant money. It's the same in science too, that you need some of those breakthroughs, either because people don't see it as a lucrative, you know, enterprise, or they just don't see it right now. Following a lot of research funding, understandably so, because there's just not enough of it. It has to be so evolutionary and not revolutionary. And so they're not going to fund something that is really maybe even just 2 or 3 steps further down the pipeline than the data currently would indicate could be a success.
Yes.
So it's, okay, this next grant Is it, for the most part, 95% certain that it will turn out the way that you predict? It is? Great. That's a safe bet for us.
Right.
Is it 50-50? We're not going to give you a multi-million-dollar grant to do that.
Well, and the sad thing is sometimes when that happens, you don't even get to see it published. And then when it's not published, no one's learning from that information, which is like a huge bummer in my mind.
Correct. Yeah.
So a question for you then would be, twofold. What is one thing that you believe to be true that is not yet scientifically validated? No gotchas later.
Yep.
So kind of like a hypothesis that you might have right now. And then the second piece of that is, what is one experiment you wish you could do, but yet they, would not receive funding for, that put it at like the 100K or less kind of mode out of curiosity.
Yeah. I think, and maybe I'm just going to use you because you're such a brilliant mind to sort of, I'll say there's maybe one venture opportunity, one commercial opportunity, and then one kind of blue sky research.
Cool. Let's hear them.
The venture opportunity is I would take the $100,000. And right now I've been doing basic science for most of my life. I've seen the desperation for sleep out there in the public. I am now going to transition much more to creating technology and devices to actually change human sleep for the better. That's where I'm going to be probably moving at least 50% of my research program.
Amazing.
So I would take the $100,000. When was the last time you heard of a sleep incubator program?
Sleep incubator program? I don't think I ever have. Yeah.
No one has.
Yeah.
Why don't we?
Yeah.
Because it's a third of our lives.
Yeah.
I would take the 100,000. I've got a plan for a sleep incubator program. Develop new entrepreneurs into the space. The space is very lucrative right now. We need amazing entrepreneurs to come up with fantastic ideas for products and services, but it has to be led by the guide of science, because there is so much snake oil out there when it comes to sleep charlatan.
Oh my God, especially on the supplement side. Yeah.
It's sorry, Mom, I said BS. It's complete nonsensical. So I would like to create that to produce integrity and authenticity around some kind of a sleep incubator program. That would be sort of one component. I think the second one, which probably is more of a technology device, I'm getting very interested in this tired but wired phenomenon. Most people in society, they're struggling with sleep because they're so stressed and anxious. And it is an epidemic. It's just, people say, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of talking, but I'm so wired that I can't fall asleep.
Right.
There is some really interesting technology that we're starting to play around with that tries to hit something called the vagus nerve.
Oh, I've been using some of the stimulation devices out there.
Correct. And there are some ones that are implanted, and no one wants to do invasive.
No.
There are some ones on the wrist that, but we're actually looking at a novel entry point that is non-invasive, that will directly stimulate the vagus nerve. And for those who don't know the vagus nerve,
novel entry point sounds very
don't
precarious.
worry. There are no rectal probes involved. Nothing along that type of line. It would be a very it would be an easy thing to do.
Okay.
And not dissimilar to sort of.
Have you tested this yet? Do you know?
We've got a little bit of preliminary data, but we're going to try and hopefully get a big study. But again, it's getting funding for it.
What's the funding on that one?
So right now, it's probably going to be to do a pilot study about 100K. And the goal here for folks is that the vagus nerve essentially is a way that you can communicate between the brain and the body's nervous system. And the vagus nerve, when you stimulate it, it shifts you over from this kind of fight or flight branch of your body's nervous system into this more quiescent, restful branch called the parasympathetic.
Versus the sympathetic.
And the sympathetic is nothing. It's terribly named in that regard. It's very agitating.
Yeah.
But and so that feeds a signal back up to the brain. And when you are tired, your brain wants sleep, but the body's nervous system is fight or flight sympathetic. You're so wired, you can't fall asleep. And I want to disengage that using a device before sleep.
And so I've seen a lot of devices, potentially snake oil out there, that try to say that they can stimulate this. I've seen everything from necklaces to behind the ear devices to kind of you name it. What makes this one so unique and different from what we've seen out there in the market?
I think it's probably going to be the location. It's going to be one of those locations that are out there right now. But I think the way it sounds very easy to do. Let's say that you're just going to stimulate on the wrist. And you think, well, so it's just stimulation on the wrist.
And by the way,
is it?
So people that know it, is it typically vibration that it's a simulation, or
it's
what?
Usually electricity.
Electricity, okay.
So we're inputting small amounts of voltage.
Okay.
Because if you want to communicate with the nervous system, speak in its currency.
Right.
Which is electricity. Yes. Although there are different ways you can do that too. So, but it's actually a high dimensionality problem, because how long do you stimulate? There's one dimension. Where do you stimulate on the body? There's a second dimension. What is the intensity of the stimulation in terms of the voltage? What are the wave frequencies of the electrical stimulation?
Yes.
Is it just, a full, just you're off and you're on for a while, then you're off or is it an alternating current?
Yes.
And if it's an alternating current, is it going up and down many times a second, or very slow? And
right.
all of a sudden, you've got 7 or 8 experimental groups. It's actually a very hard problem to crack.
How are you reading this? Like, you got this, it could be brain activity, essentially.
Yeah, so you can use brain activity. You can use other metrics in the body, such as heart rate or heart rate variability.
Oh, yeah, interesting. So heart HRV will go up if you're properly stimulating it?
Properly stimulating it. The heart rate can typically go down, doesn't always have to. Heart rate variability typically goes up, which is a good sign. Not like heart rate sort of higher during the day, that's usually stress. We think of it as bad. Heart rate variability, the opposite. Higher it is.
This could help
better.
a ton of people.
So that's another idea that I've got brewing. I think the third idea that I would love to try and do is examine how to placate the bad things that happen when you are sleep deprived, because I can bang the drum about getting to bed,
yes,
and getting in bed for 8 hours. And again, I can do that for the next 10 years, just like I've done for the previous 10 years. And there will always be either circumstances where you're not getting enough sleep, jet lag, classic example. Even I can't, necessarily completely solve jet lag for myself.
Yeah, and then also that's
new parents, stressful times at work.
Yes.
Or I'm just someone. So let's just assume then that we can't solve all of that sleep deprivation.
Okay.
You can throw your hands up and say, too bad. Or you can say, well, but what's the concern here? The concern here is the downstream consequences of a lack of sleep. It's not really the lack of sleep per se. It's the impact that it has on your brain and your body.
Yeah.
Recent data in animal models and in fruit flies has been stunning. What they've been able to demonstrate is that a collection of different antioxidants can prevent the mortality consequences of total sleep deprivation. So, in other words, if you sleep deprive rodents or fruit flies, they will often die.
Yes.
If you sleep deprive them enough, you will kill them.
Well, you'll kill humans. There's that. What is that horrible
it's
disease?
Called fatal familial insomnia,
Jesus.
And it's a genetic disorder, and ultimately it leads to death.
It sounds like probably the worst way to die.
It's up there with things like probably
dementia
ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, as it's called here.
So people that don't know what it is correct me if I'm wrong here, but people they can't fall asleep until they die. Is that right?
Gradually, what happens is that an insomnia sets in. It becomes worse and worse and worse. At some point, they go into what seems to be an enfeebled dementia state, and then ultimately they pass. Now, it's hard to argue that it's the definitive lack of sleep itself in the human model, because we can't do the studies to show that.
Right.
It's what we call a prion protein disease. You've probably heard of like mad cow disease.
Yes.
That's another one of those. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It's another one of those, what we call a prion protein, where these proteins go rogue and they start to misfold in their conformation shape, and they will start to cause brain degradation.
Gotcha.
But let's go back to the idea of saying, okay, I'm just under conditions of sleep deprivation for the next month,
right?
Or I'm a frequent flyer, or whatever it is. It's not really the lack of sleep that bothers me. It's all of the terrible things that you've been telling me that are going to happen.
Right.
So then why don't I solve for the terrible things rather than trying to stop the sleep deprivation itself? That's another way of doing it.
Sure.
And these studies, they were and it was almost seemingly that they stumbled upon it because they were using lots of different compounds to say, is there anything that can salvage the life of these animals in these total sleep deprivation experiments? Experiments.
You got to tell me what the compounds are.
And the compounds were different forms of antioxidants.
Like PQQ,
vitamin
like
C,
taurine,
melatonin. Interesting. But the problem is that you have to create this combinatorial set to get the best outcomes, because what they were finding is that different organ systems were sensitive to different antioxidants. So back up, Matt. Sleep deprivation is having a multi-organ, multi-cognitive network, emotional network devastation of your system.
Right. And then how would you measure that? That's got to be very hard to measure in humans, right?
Well, not so much, because we can do blood biomarkers. I can measure your cardiovascular system. I can measure your hormonal profiles. I can measure your blood sugar responses. Upstairs in the brain, I can measure your functional brain connectivity with my brain scanner.
Yes.
I can measure your cognitive performance, your learning and memory.
That's a great point.
I can measure your emotional state. I can measure your immune factors, your inflammatory factors. We can now map at fairly low-ish cost a good amount of the human being in terms of physiology.
All that's cheap. Those are all cheap.
I mean, brain scans are a couple of grand a pop, but
the blood draw,
the blood draw, all of these things, they're not that difficult to do. So all of a sudden, I can map you, Kevin Rose, the biological organism with some degree of fidelity that's acceptable for the experiment.
Yeah.
Then I can put you through experimentally a night of sleep deprivation.
Right.
And then I can do it again.
Yeah.
And one of those conditions, I'm going to dose you with the proprietary blend of antioxidants that we've come up with. And I'm going to see if I've been able to de-risk out of your system the consequences.
Right.
And then we're going to map which of the ingredients produced the sort of placation, the protection against sleep deprivation for different systems in your brain and your body. So if you're going to really ask me, I love devices. I love the idea. I want to create a sleep incubator program. But this to me, because then I could create a proprietary blend. I know it has to be a for-profit. You can't, you've got to make money to fund the studies, because I'm not going to sell snake oil. If my mum's buying this for like up $50 or $100 per bottle, then that's her hard-earned pension money. So I'm going to create it, and I'm going to need money to do that. So yes, you monetize it. It's a for-profit system. But then all of a sudden, I'm going to try to do something for the public. I'm not going to publish a paper that sits in a library somewhere that, based on the mediocrity of my own science, only leads to 7 people reading it. I want to do something.
But this has to be a true placebo blind, like you have to go all the way, right?
Yeah, but you start off, you don't have to start off full on RCT, randomized controlled, sort of placebo controlled, crossover design, multi-armed. You can just start a crawl, walk, run approach.
Sure.
And so it would be easy to blind people. They wouldn't know what pill they're getting.
Right. And so for the deprivation side, would it be just, I'm going to wake you up and make you watch Netflix and to make sure you don't fall asleep? Like,
first thing we do is we do it in the extreme, and then we come back.
Right.
Full night of sleep deprivation. So let's say transatlantic flight, you got a miserable seat, could not sleep a wink.
Right.
You hit the ground in London the following day. Now you have to be awake for all of your business meetings. You're going on 30 hours of no sleep so far.
Well, how do you replicate that in a lab though?
So then we just keep you awake. So we have monitored staff. And we will just watch you. And
your poor staff better be taking some of this too.
The nice thing is we do split shift systems with the staff. They get to sleep, and we will have EEG electrodes on, so we can make sure that.
How much is the study?
I mean, it depends on the extent of it.
The crawl, I think, is what you said first, right? You said
crawl, walk, run.
Yeah. So what's the crawl version get you?
The crawl could be, 150K that we could do a small pilot study.
What's and of what? How many patients do you think?
I mean, for brain scanning studies, if you've got, it depends on the effect sizes that you're expecting, but usually we need about 25 people to really go through that. Now, don't forget that that's a hugely labor-intensive study, because they've got to go through 2 rounds of sleep deprivation.
Right.
Full 36-hour monitoring from a massive amount of staff, together with all of these brain scanners, and so it going to be a sizable study, but it's probably going to, I mean, I'd have to, go down on paper and really, but I think you could probably do a version of it for, 150, maybe north of 150.
Okay.
Not too much more.
So this is really cool. I like,
and that would be, you could see a bunch
of
of like investors to say, okay, I can see now that this a proprietary blend.
Oh, once you have the blend, you can get it funded for anyone.
Correct.
I'll fund that tomorrow. They're done. Yeah. Like that's easy. It's the study part that is the gamble, right?
Yeah.
So,
but isn't it worth it? Because you can try to help individuals. We are in this global state of sleep deprivation, and there is so much disease, sickness, and suffering as a consequence of that lack of sleep. And if I can at least downscale some of the disease part of that equation, and why not?
Well, one thing I want to ask you though is like you mentioned melatonin. That's typically, that is going to induce sleep in most individuals depending on the dose. And by the way, it seems that some of the doses these days are just outrageous.
In psychedelic terms, the doses of melatonin are what we call heroic,
yeah, which is like when I see 5 mgs out there, I'm like, who's taking that? But people do.
Some people are saying, I'm on 20 right now.
That's where insane. So, but anyway, let's get back to that. Yeah. So, would you think that melatonin can have protective effects that aren't related to sleep? Meaning, so you're saying there's a good chance, like as part of this antioxidant, I'm just making this up, as part of the compounds you're putting together.
Yeah.
The pill I swallow has, I don't know, 250 micrograms of melatonin in it.
Right.
It actually does cause me to sleep at that dose even, which is great. It's probably what people should be taking if they're taking melatonin. Is something?
Yeah, anywhere between 0.5 to about 2 milligrams.
Yeah, that's crazy. People do 20. But anyway, so let's say that is, so you're thinking that might be protective even if they're awake.
Correct.
Wow.
That's the reason that we're taking it. In fact, now we're turning the tables on melatonin.
And you're taking it during the day?
Taking it during the day. At a microdose, though, that will not produce sleepiness. So that's the goal. But then you've got to create this cocktail. And if you look back at melatonin is not just a mammalian thing. Melatonin was around long before we mammals came onto the planet.
In forms of what?
It's in plants.
Oh, it's in plants naturally.
And the reason is because it's really good at mopping up something called free radicals. From what? UV damage.
Wow. Amazing.
Melatonin was the original antioxidant, it seemed, or one of them.
Amazing.
For plants. Because when we say antioxidants, what are we talking about, by the way, folks? There are these things called free radical species that are just sort of charged specific molecules in the body that are rogue, and they do DNA damage and some other bad things inside of your body. But thankfully, coming to the rescue are the mopping services of antioxidants.
Right.
That's why antioxidants are so healthy for us, because they mop up the free radical damage that can be otherwise deleterious. And your body has created this system for it. And that system was created long before mammals popped online, as I said, in plants, because they would suffer from free radical creation due to UV damage. So lo and behold, melatonin came online and started to mop up the free radical UV damage. So melatonin would be one of the components, but there are lots of others.
Okay.
If the melatonin created sleepiness, that's not going to be ideal because you're already trying to stay awake. And so you're going to have to come up with, a decent first pass blend based on the literature. And I think there's enough literature now where I can kind of, squint my eyes, get a little blurry, and then say,
let's try this.
Humans. What do we think?
Okay, so let me ask you a question, and I'm going to go out on a crazy limb here and propose something, and we can always cut it out of the podcast if it doesn't work. So I haven't announced this yet, but by the time this podcast is out, it'll be out there. I am taking my 115,000 newsletter subscribers, moving them over to Substack. And like Sam Harris did recently, he moved over to Substack as well. He created a private community that is like a paid membership only community, okay? Yeah. And it's nice because it's a more intimate conversation with like the people that really care about your content and blah, blah, blah. We can talk about this offline. And
really, I should probably do something.
You probably should, actually. It's quite cool. I'm going to launch that by the time this is out, and it is going to be a paid thing, but I feel very lucky that I've made some good investments in life. I don't need this I don't want to nickel and dime people for anything, but I also want to do some fun stuff with this kind of capital, right? So I think what I'm going to propose, tell me what you think of this. If anyone signs up for that's listening to this, I'll just take that money give it to you free of charge and fund this study.
Wow.
If we don't get the 150K, let's just say we get 50K worth of people signing up, I'll just make up the difference myself. We'll get this done and we'll see what we can make. And if you were one of the people that signed up during this time, maybe they can be an early tester once we actually get it into, some type of form that beta testers can try. And as
Bloody hell, this would be amazing.
Would you be down with that?
I'm so down with that.
Okay, sweet.
And maybe what I can do is on my podcast, and we can see if we can get a number of even other people's sort of podcasts. We'll see if we can just crowdsource some additional
100%.
funds and just see if we can bring people who are just health, society, and sleep conscious and supportive to the table. And again, it doesn't, if you get, people who are just saying, okay, here's my, $5 for today's coffee, or in this modern age, it's usually $15 per day or whatever the habit is.
Yeah.
Could I just throw $5 at this?
Right.
And you don't need, much of a spread of people to jump on board to finally start to get there. And we could maybe not just do a crawl version, but we could do a little bit of certainly a crawl walk.
Yeah,
version.
I love this. I'm all about. I just funded another study at UCSF. I haven't announced it yet, but it's just pure philanthropic side with Clotho. Do you know the drug Clotho?
Yep.
So do you know Dina?
Yeah.
So I just
Peter Attia actually did a fantastic podcast on it.
That's how I learned about it.
Clotho. Oh, you did? Okay.
And I was like, okay.
Brilliant
and
podcast.
so I reached out to Dina, the principal researcher. She's so awesome.
God, she nailed that podcast.
Oh, God, it's so good. And so anyway, I helped fund a study of hers, not through this method, but just on my own. And I asked her, I was like, what is the thing that no one else will fund or is going to take you a year or two to get funding for it? Let's do it today. Because when you're talking about curing, in this particular case, for people that don't know, go watch Peter Attia's interview with her. It's around dementia and Alzheimer's disease via this compound called Clotho, which is naturally occurring in the human body. And it's fascinating. But anyway, long story short, let's do more crowdsourced stuff. Like, why not?
100%. And in fact, if any pharma company is out there, any of the big ones out there who would also want to join in, I'm not necessarily averse to that too, because, it would be sweetening of the pot and the pie, and you're probably going to have partners if you want production. Whatever it is, I think we should just bring as many people to the conversational table. Yeah. And then, figure out what is the most appropriate way for the public to, ultimately have a product supported and validated, what's in their best interest. And then if you've got the luxury of lots of different hands wanting to feed the mouth of it, then that's great. Okay, so we'll do this. For if you go to kevinrose.com, anyone that signs up this month, I'll take 100% of that proceeds and plow it into this. I'll make up the difference in my own capital. Your website, people can go there as well. My foundation, it's the Global Sleep Science and Education Foundation. And if you just go to whywesleep.org, you will get there. WHY. Yes, WHY. Yeah. Why We Sleep. So not Y as in the letter, but WHY. Why We Sleep, same title as the book. So it's whywesleep.org. And there you will also be able to do a personalized sleep test that we've created based on what we think is now a global sleep index, which can be fun to do. And just give us a little bit of money if you would be so kind. Yeah, people don't realize like $5 is a huge deal in aggregate, right? Yep. Like it is a big deal. Yep. So, and if there are other people out there who have pockets that are a little bit deeper and you've been touched by sleep, or you know the importance of sleep in your life, or that I could help you with your sleep from a personal perspective, please reach out to. This is going to be fun. And we got to do the other one too, the vagus nerve one. That one I want to do as well. That one is okay. Pretty red. We got a lot to talk about, and especially at the True Ventures front, where I'm the venture capitalist. There's a lot of stuff we can do together. Okay, I'm very excited. All right, so let's keep moving. It's going to be like a 3-hour show, but that was a really fun one. Love it. You did mention nightmare prevention. I'm sure there's some people out there going to be like, oh my God, like please don't forget that one. Yeah. What's the latest on that? Real quick, there is something called image rehearsal therapy, or IRT for short. And it works by essentially updating the Word document of the nightmare. And it was maybe 15 years ago, my group, we were able to publish the first human data of a strange phenomenon in human memory. You would think that the way that we create memories is that you essentially have an experience, the brain imprints the information, and then it's locked in there like a fly that's set in amber as a fossil for the rest of time. But imagine a word version of that you open up a report and you start working on it day one, and then you hit the save button, and we hit the save button on our memories too at night during sleep. It just takes a lot longer biologically to hit the save button versus digitally. But then imagine the next day if you were to come back and you double click on that report again and you open it back up and it says, I'm sorry, you can't edit it. You can't change it. You think, well, hang on a second, that's ridiculous. Why would you create an informational storage system that wasn't editable every time you reactivated or reopened up that informational file? And we used to think that memory worked in that type of hard-coded way. You make a memory, you save it, and then it's that memory for the rest of time. What we found was that once you learn information, you sleep and you consolidate that information. You hit that biological save button. But then when you reactivate the memory, meaning when you replay or bring back to mind the memory. So if I would say, last night for dinner, what was it that you had, Kevin, for your evening meal? You'd be able to tell me what that meal was. Now, every time you reactivate that memory, you double click it, bring it back to conscious mind. It's actually open up for ability to change, for editing, for revising, for modifying it. Now, that can lead to things like false memories or inaccurate memories, but it's a very clever system, because if I were to say, what's your favorite meal to have of an evening? 5 years ago, it may have been one thing, but with experience and time, you've constantly been reactivating the my favorite meal file, and you've been updating it, and now it's more appropriate.
I still like pepperoni pizza, to be honest.
You know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Come on. There's a hashtag fish and chips for the bread. But I would say we discovered this mechanism called reconsolidation. So when you reactivate it, you can edit it, and then you resave it during sleep the next night.
Is that like under hypnosis, or how do you get to a state where that's more malleable?
All you need to do is consciously recall the memory. And then what happened most recently in the past couple of years, people realized we can use this therapeutically. That with a nightmare, you can have someone who is very good at repeating, bringing back to mind what that nightmare is, and that nightmare never changes. It's what we call recurring nightmare. Now, the place when you want to go and get help for this is saying, we all have nightmares, but if this repeating nightmare, this repetitive nightmare is causing you daytime distress and sort of waking life disability mentally, that's the time to go and get seen to.
What about people that have different nightmares, but a lot of nightmares?
Well, you have to take, using this method, each one individually.
Okay.
And what you do is, working with a therapist, you then sit back down, you say, I'd like to relive the nightmare. And let's say it's because I got into a really bad car accident and I was trying to pump the brakes. The brakes were not working. Someone rear-ended me. I went straight into the intersection. Horrible, just bad.
Sure.
And I'm having a repetitive nightmare of that event. The therapist says, let's relive that. But now instead, I want you to imagine the scenario where you're pumping the brakes and the brakes re-engage. And in fact, you're able to turn the steering wheel and you just bring it to the right side of the road into the safe lane, and you don't go out into the junction. And then when you come up with this basically inert, neutral end scenario, you send them away and you ask them, maybe it's a timer every day for just 10 minutes. They have to rehearse the new ending over and over. So they are reactivating the trauma memory, but they are now trying to edit the document with a revised, more sort of safe, non-trauma ending. And then at night, gradually what we see, the more that they do that, the less and less intense and the less frequent their nightmares become, to the point where you extinguish the nightmare entirely.
Single nightmare, or what if someone is having multiple different nightmares?
So you have to. So each scenario you're going to have to treat in an individual.
But they might have some kind of theme to them. Probably some underlying
theme where there's basically cross-pollination.
Right.
But we typically don't see people having, a broad confetti collection of multiple nightmares. It's usually one or three, maybe max. So you can still do it in a digestible, bite-sized manner with targeted therapy.
Fascinating. So tell people what that was called again.
It's called IRT, which stands for Image Rehearsal Therapy. Most therapists probably won't know about it. It's a very new technique in sleep science, but it's now being demonstrated to be really quite effective.
Are there organizations or websites that will recommend therapists that are trained in this?
Probably we can certainly put them in the show notes. There may be some board certified sleep medicine and also clinical psychology websites where you can look up to see.
Okay.
I think what I would do is I would point people to a collection of researchers that we can put in the show notes that are doing some of the most cutting edge work on this.
Okay.
And they may be good contacts to reach out to. And those people are usually very helpful to try to recommend to say, yes, go see this person.
And maybe be involved in a study or something as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's do some rapid fire stuff.
Love it.
Can I throw some compounds at you and you say yay or nay?
Yep.
And you can give me a couple, obviously a little bit more color. If
add some little filigree.
On the concierge medicine side, gabapentin is like the go-to for sleep.
Yeah.
They're like giving it out like candy because it's really hard. You can't really, it's very hard to overdose on it.
Correct.
Like you can take like 30 of them, you take 3 of them or 30 of them or whatever.
Typically used for pain.
Don't take 30 of them, but
please don't.
Talk to your doctor, but you know what I'm saying.
Gabapentin, good or bad? Good in the sense that makes you fall asleep faster. You spend less time awake at night, and it can increase the amount of deep sleep.
I get a hangover from it though.
But that's the problem. There are no free lunches in biology. And often people say they get those sleep benefits, but during the waking day, they're just groggy and they just are dragged.
I'd rather have a bad night's sleep than a hangover.
To be honest, so they start off that way and then they can't take it. Maybe you can try to find the sweet spot, but for the most part, it's tough. The other drug that's in that same family is called pregabalin.
I've had pregabalin as well. That's more addictive though, right?
It can be more addictive, and pregabalin and gabapentin, they are typically not used as a sleep aid in that regard. They're used to treat a sleep disorder called restless leg syndrome.
That's right.
Which is a terrible, terrible sleep disorder. So I would say, objectively, can it improve sleep? Yes. Do most people tolerate it well? Ultimately, not so much.
Yeah, but no potential. Like I remember when we were talking years ago, and we were talking about some of the big, sleep drugs that were out there,
the Ambien,
and the bad stuff.
Yep.
Those were linked to cancer. Those were linked to all kinds of bad things.
Yeah.
Have something like gabapentin?
Not so much.
Okay, so a little safer profile then. Okay.
Although absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Sure, understood. Melatonin. 250 mgs, half mgs. Do you still recommend it for people that need it?
I would say I think we've got melatonin a bit wrong with sleep. I've been on record, and I think the meta-analyses are very clear that overall, it's just not a useful sleep aid. Why? It helps tell your brain when it's time to fall asleep, but it doesn't generate sleep itself. I don't know if that's completely correct. I think there is a sub-cloud cluster of the population for whom they are melatonin sleep generating sensitive, and then the rest of the people doesn't change their sleep at all.
It does work with me, but
right, exactly.
I wake up in the middle of the night.
Yep.
So it doesn't. I have to try and find the extended release formula, and I don't even know if that's really working.
Right.
But some companies do put out an extended release, and then I often find it's way too heavy of a dose, so I do get the brain fog action the next day.
Yep.
So it doesn't sound like it's. Do you recommend it to anyone? Like, is there?
I would say the only time I would use it is when you're traveling to try to deal with jet lag, to help with the tricking of your brain to think it's nighttime when your body 24-hour clock is still saying, oh my God, I'm still stuck on California time.
Right.
And I'm 8 hours behind if I'm in London. So no, I wouldn't. Pediatric use of melatonin, I would be very careful if I were a parent. It's, again, they're sold like gummies in the purple aisle of the health food section of your local, supermarket.
Yeah.
And if it's the, healthy supermarket, you think everything's good and fine. What if I told you that if I went into a school system tonight and I spoke to the parents and the teachers and said, there is a bioactive hormone that I would like you to start dosing your children with. I would like you to give them a dose that is super physiological, meaning it's maybe double, triple, maybe 10 times more than their bodies would ever naturally release. It's also a hormone that can disrupt the maturation of their sexual development. And I would like you to start dosing them in excess every single night. Who's with me?
Holy shit. And that's what this is.
But in some ways, that's what it is. Now, I don't mean to be scaremongering. Melatonin, just like gabapentin, is actually a very inert drug. It's largely safe. The only thing is that in the past 10 years, there was some data that came out that admissions to emergency rooms for melatonin poisonous overdosing has increased by 503% in the past 10 years.
That's crazy. I didn't even know that was a thing. You could take too much of it.
People get admitted.
So so many questions about that. So on the melatonin side, the antioxidant potential is there.
Antioxidant potential is there. I think the amount of it, because it's not regulated by the FDA here in America, it can be, as little as 70% less than what it says to 478% more than what it says on the bottle. You've got no idea. Try to get a brand that has a QRI code that you scan on the side that takes you to a third-party independent laboratory test.
Yes.
And you can check the purity, make sure it's
Consumer Lab is good like that. I don't know if you know that website, consumerlab.com. They're really good at the third-party testing. So I already know the answer. Well, let's just start with this one. GABA's thrown into everything these days. All sleep supplements have GABA. Does it work?
The data is pretty unreliable.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've heard the bioavailability is like,
and how effective those compounds are actually getting into the brain itself, crossing the blood-brain barrier. I think there are other things that you can do to try to promote sleep. I mean, the thing with all of these supplements, and I'll steal a phrase from our dear friend Peter Attia, when you're trying to look for supplements to help with your sleep, you are majoring in the minors and you are minoring in the majors. Focus on regularity, making sure you go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, give yourself the right amount of time in bed, get your stress and your anxiety managed in a variety of different ways.
Yes.
Do some exercise, get some daylight. Those things in terms of their effect size on your sleep will dwarf anything in terms of supplements. Now, I think there is a time and a place for supplements where you can actually, if you're good and you're optimized, how can we get you even further down the path? Then let's think about supplementation, and that could be wonderful.
Right.
But for the most part, if you are a mess with your sleep and you're reaching for supplements as your first line treatment, you're missing the big picture.
That's a great point. I'm assuming the hardcore ones like the benzos, like Xanax, Valium, do those?
They're not really now advocated in sleep science for a number of reasons. They are short term if they're going to be used at all, and we're talking weeks. Most people have been using them for years.
Yeah.
Second, they
knock people out.
They knock people out, but there is a class of drugs that are called the sedative hypnotics, and sedation is not sleep. So when you take a Valium or a Xanax, I'm not going to suggest that you're awake. You are clearly not awake.
Right.
But to say that you're in natural sleep is an equal fallacy.
That's a good point.
But I would say that overall, if you are suffering from major anxiety or stress, that's where it's typically administered in clinical sleep medicine for a short time period. The reason that it's short is because you develop dependency very quickly. Second, overdose potential, unlike gabapentin or melatonin, very high. Number three, its interactions with other medications are stunning. I mean, Valium probably has over 500 other medications that it deleteriously interacts with.
So stay away.
No need to go there.
Okay.
You don't have to.
Are you still a fan of sleep temperature, dropping the temperature?
Huge. I think temperature is still, even though there's some great companies out there now using it, and full disclosure, I myself and Peter Attia and Andrew Huberman, we all just joined the scientific advisory board for 8 Sleep.
I love 8 Sleep.
I think they're a brilliant company, and I really like the founder, CEO Matteo. I think they're trying to do good, so I'll get behind a product. I could be a scientist where I think other people would say, well, you're selling out by joining, and you can armchair all you want, critical about sleep products out there as a scientist, or you can actually say, wouldn't it be better if I got my boots dirty in the trenches with those companies and I tried to make them better companies with sound science? I've chosen to go that route.
I'm glad you have.
To go back the other route. And I understand why people would criticize me for that. I get it, but that's the path I've chosen. So yes, I'm still very bullish on temperature. You can do cheap versions of it. You can do warm bath or hot shower before bed. It's a great de-stressor. I
was going to ask you about that sauna usage before bed.
That's another study I'd like to do. There are actually no good studies. So if there's a sauna company out there that wants to, put some money behind a pilot study, shoot us a couple of the infrared saunas. We'll install them in the sleep lab. I do think it probably has a great benefit. I just know of no data. So how can you back it up one way or the other?
Yeah.
No one's done that study. Love to do it.
When people are programming their 8 sleep, and for people that don't know, you get an iPhone app and it lets you drop the temperature on each side of the bed, which is nice because Daria has hers, I have mine. I know that sleep onset, correct me if I'm wrong here, but actually warmer to get started can actually help you fall asleep, but then colder is better for the deep sleep. Do I have that right?
Interesting. So the story of temperature and sleep is a 3-part stanza. You have to warm up to cool down to fall asleep. You have to stay cool to stay asleep. And you have to warm up to wake up.
Okay.
And so the first part doesn't make sense. Why do I have to warm up to cool down? I have to warm the surface of your body to act like a snake charmer, to draw the hot trapped blood from the core of your body out to the surface. I can do that with a warm bath, a shower, or a mattress that's set at neutral, a little bit above neutral, thermo-neutral.
I put mine at 4 on
that's
the
great.
8
That's
sleep.
fine too. That's lovely. And what that means is that all of the blood races to the surface.
It feels so good when you get in bed in a nice warm bed.
The cheap version back in the day, hot water bottle with your feet, great too, because they're very vascular. That's the reason that you put your hands or your feet on it. All of a sudden, you get this huge decrease in your core body temperature when you get out the bath or the shower, or you get into the smart mattress, and that drops your core body temperature, so you fall asleep faster. Then you need to stay cold at the core of your body to stay asleep and get deep sleep, and that's why the mattresses have this particular thermal signature,
Yes.
and they will drop you even further. And then you have to warm up to wake up. It's the reason why most of us use a hot drink in the morning. Your caffeine, you can say, look, Daria, I left the dishes in the sink. I'm so sorry again. I did it last night. I just give me 5 minutes with a cup of coffee and I'll be a better version of myself. But please don't say anything to me right now. 5 minutes later, you're better.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with the caffeine. Why? Caffeine doesn't hit a peak plasma concentration until about 12 to 17 minutes later. So what are you feeling? The warm liquid itself already starts to increase your core body temperature and the brain temperature. And that's why you get a first wave of a benefit from your hot cup of joe in the morning. Then you get the second benefit of the caffeine hitting itself.
Wow. That's very cool. And I've woken up a couple times too cold. So there has to be a sweet spot there. Because then when you wake up too cold, you're like, fuck, I'm cold.
No,
like,
you can take it too far. And I think once you go down to about 14 degrees Celsius, I'm trying to do the Fahrenheit math in my head right now, you can go both too warm and too cold. The warming up is also tricky, by the way, that if you go too hot, so warming up to wake up is not just about warming up to wake up, it's about warming up to get more REM sleep. And I can we've found it very difficult to change human REM sleep with lots of different methods for us to change deep non-REM sleep. Very difficult to do REM sleep. We've been playing with some techniques now where we get you to a temperature sweet spot where we enhance your REM sleep even before we enhance the awakening process that finally terminates this thing called sleep itself.
Yeah.
The tricky part is that I have to get you to thermoneutrality to boost REM sleep, meaning it's a Goldilocks phenomenon. I can't get you too hot. I can't get you too cold, just the right amount. And when I hit your thermal neutrality, match your body temperature, essentially, then all of a sudden, I can enhance REM sleep as a consequence.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay.
So I'm still very bullish. If it's bearish or bullish, I'm very bullish on temperature and sleep.
Awesome. I won't waste your time with a bunch of other things. There's obviously magnesium and taurine and a bunch of other compounds.
Magnesium, I'd very quickly say, for the most part, if you are older, suffering from insomnia, or magnesium deficient, magnesium can help improve your sleep. Usually oxide over citrate. Citrate doesn't seem to have much of a benefit. Problem is oxide, tough on the tummy.
Yes.
Magtine or magnesium L-threonate.
Yeah, the one that gets in the brain better.
The one that gets in the brain better. What's the data on sleep? Drum roll, basically none.
Yeah.
And so there, I would say if you gun to my head, if there's a form of magnesium I would suggest, it would probably be magnesium L-threonate. Any data for me to support that statement? Not right now.
And then in terms of any other supplements that we're just not even mentioning or are on my radar, any other molecules to watch on the horizon?
Not supplements. I'm getting very interested in cannabinoids. and particularly targeting the CB1 receptor. So you have a CB1 receptor and a CB2 receptor. CB1 is the receptor that is more dominant in the brain. And I'm getting very interested in agonists, essentially stimulating the cannabinoid system with synthetic CB1 receptor compounds to see if we can improve sleep. So I would say if there's anything on the horizon, that's it. We definitely do not advocate for THC in sleep. The data there, and we don't know to go into it. It's just not great.
How about CBN? CBN was a hot one for
not
sleep.
Enough data right now. We've got not enough data on CBD, let alone CBN. I would say that there is a little bit of data though on THC and sleep apnea. Where they were finding that the THC actually, above and beyond not just CBD, but the THC itself, actually seemed to reduce some of the heavy snoring and the sleep apnea events. Now, I don't think the benefit there outweighs the current standard of care, the current standard treatments, nor do I think it's worth the downsides that nevertheless still come with THC.
Right.
But could you produce an analog, find out what it is that is benefiting the snoring and the sleep apnea without the downsides of typical kind of, whole spectrum THC.
Right.
And therefore take away that need for, certain other types of sleep apnea interventions that some people can find adherence to. Although I would say that now the sleep apnea devices, they're so great. I mean, a company called ResMed leads the way. They are doing stunning things. I have no affiliation with them, but don't worry if you're fearful of sleep apnea treatment, they will see you right.
Amazing. Okay. A couple more. I know you've already given. What time is your flight out? Are you staying for a bit?
Oh, no, I'm staying. Okay. Yeah. I flew in from Austin, so I am.
Okay, sweet.
I'm sticking around.
Okay. So a couple more things here. Let's just say you've had a really you've had no sleep. You're kind of like tossing, turning. It's not working. We're rolling around to 5 a.m. It's almost like, do I call it? Do I just get up and do my thing?
Yeah.
Do you try and rush in that 1 hour, or do you just go for the day and then build more sleep debt so you have a better night's sleep the next night? Or is there just no data one way or the other?
No, I think there is some advice that we can give. I would say that if you're in that last hour before bed and you are just tossing and turning, and
like it's just been a full night's sleep of no sleep. Yeah.
I just my alarm's going to go off at 6:30. It's 5:30. I've been awake for 15 minutes and I just know myself, I'm not going to nail this.
Yeah.
Then I would say pull a ripcord, but after a bad night of sleep, there are 4 things that I'm going to tell you to do. Firstly, do not go to bed any earlier that following evening, because your body is not naturally ready for bed at an earlier time. Mm-hmm. And so you may then lie in bed tossing and turning and set yourself up for yet another bad night.
I gotcha.
Next, don't try to, after a bad night of sleep, say, okay, now only I've been awake for the first half of the night. It's now 5 a.m. I've got another hour and a half before my alarm goes off. I'm just going to sleep late. Don't sleep any later, because if you sleep later, you're not going to build up enough wakefulness across that following day. And yet again, you'll set yourself up for another bad night of sleep. Don't hammer the caffeine. Just know it's going to be a rough day.
Yes.
Don't take more than you normally do. And don't nap during the day, because then you just, once again, you've been building up all of this healthy sleepiness, especially after the bad night of sleep. And then you go and nap, and you just take away some of that sleep pressure.
So when do you nap then? Like when?
I would say if you are not struggling with sleep and you can nap regularly, naps are great. We've done lots of studies with them. Bottom line, I would say best protocol practices, no more than 20 minutes. Between somewhere, based on the data that we analyzed, somewhere between 16 and 22 minutes is enough of a nap to get some nice attention, alertness, energy benefits, a little bit of memory and mood benefit, but not so long that you go so deep that you wake up with this sleep hangover, and then it takes you another hour before you feel even back to normal.
Oh God, I've been there. That's brutal.
So you've got to sort of, now it's the longer you nap, the more benefits you get. And is it worth the trade-off of the sleep hangover? Yeah. Who knows? I would say optimal nap protocol, limit it to 20 minutes. Try to do not nap, assuming an average bedtime, after 2 p.m.
Right.
If you really want to do it properly in the way that we do with professional athletes, we'll sometimes do the caffeine nap or the nappuccino, where we, just before lights out, you swig an espresso, at 1 p.m., go down for your nap. 20 minutes later, you wake up. Normally, you'd still be a bit groggy, but 20 minutes later is right around the time when you're hitting your peak plasma concentration of caffeine. So you eject yourself out of the nap without any hangover with the caffeine. And we'll only use it very strategically with, athletes or high performers in terms of business. It is not a strategy to be doing. That's so scary. It's like the octane version of a nap. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. So,
sorry, I'll be more quick.
No. This is good. I know you had some involvement with Oura back in the day, sleep trackers.
Still involved with them.
You're still involved with them. Okay. So, what's your take on sleep trackers in general? I mean, I know you're involved with Oura.
Yeah, so I'm an advisor to Oura too. So again, take what I say with a grain of salt. I would say that just two things. The reason I joined them was twofold. Firstly, I think the form factor is great. Mm-hmm. I don't like things that I strap on my head or that I put across my chest, even wristwatches. Mm-hmm. When we go to sleep, we take things off. We don't put things on.
Right.
And therefore, I think that's why I like a ring. It's very unobtrusive, so it's nice, low friction, no friction. Same with a mattress. It's great. It's no friction. The accuracy, because I know kind of how the sausage is made in the factory, I think is probably about best in class for a wearable sleep tracker out there right now.
How close is that to like clinically grade?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on what classifier you're using. If it's what we call a 2-class algorithm, meaning wake from sleep, it's probably up in the 80% region relative to my $50,000 worth of sleep laboratory equipment. Once we do a 4-class algorithm, wake, light non-REM, deep non-REM, or REM, 4 classes, then you're kind of getting into the 70s, kind of mid-70s in terms of accuracy. Mm-hmm. And you think, well, so that means it's like 25%, inaccurate.
Right.
But keep in mind, here's this thing, a ring, that for, $400 plus, a subscription each month, you can get me 70, 80% of the way there versus my $50,000 worth spaghetti monster in the sleep laboratory. That's bloody incredible that we as a species have been able to develop technology like that. So the other thing I would say about sleep trackers, their absolute accuracy is this 70 to 80%, meaning for any one night relative to my gold standard sleep laboratory, it's going to get 70 to 80% of the way there. However, its relative accuracy is much higher. Meaning that the way to state this would be the following: follow weekly trend lines, not nightly headlines.
Right. So you're looking for directional movements over time.
Correct. Why? Because this thing, even though it's 75, 80% accurate, it's consistently inaccurate night to night to night to night.
Right.
So if I'm seeing deviations in my data, it's not this because it's consistently that way.
Right.
It must be me.
Right.
That's why I look for trend lines. And the final thing I would say is there is discussion out there regarding sleep trackers of getting very anxious about your sleep. And I get this. We have a condition for it now in sleep science. It's called orthosomnia. You've heard of, in medicine, ortho means straighten. So orthodontics, orthopedics, get your teeth straight. Orthopedics, get your bones straight. This is about getting your sleep straight and getting so anxious about it that it freaks you out.
Right.
2 pieces of advice if you're going through that with a sleep tracker. Number 1, if it's bad, just take it off, stop using it, put it in a drawer. We'll return to it when we fix your sleep. Number 2, don't take it off, keep it on, but only check your data once every 2 weeks. Be disciplined, or check it once every week or once every month.
Yeah.
And that way you're not waking up to the daily headline that you kind of already know yourself. I just didn't sleep well. Thanks very much. That's great. You're telling me I didn't. I kind of knew that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I took off my glucose tracker, because I was just like, I know when I eat the pizza what's going to happen. Like it's like, but I still want to check it.
Know it.
Yeah.
And there's something about objectively knowing it in a way that you would guesstimate it before that still probably has a course-correcting set of hands on your decision-making, even though you've now taken it off. You had to get to that corrected mentality by having worn it first.
Right.
So I still think there is value prop add in that regard.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right. So a couple last things. Weighted blankets, fan or no?
Current fan for people who have insomnia. I think the data is looking interesting. There was a study that was done, and they used weighted blankets. They showed that there was a 60% reduction in insomnia severity symptoms. What was also interesting is that with continued use, there's about a 40% maintenance of that insomnia benefit. It's looking even more promising for kids with ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. Those two conditions go hand in hand with sleep problems, and weighted blankets seem to have some benefit there in those populations too. The problem with all of these studies is, how do you create a placebo for a weighted blanket?
Right.
So I think there's a lot of placebo effect going on, but I also think that there is, it comes from a literature on, pressure sensitivity on the body and an anxiolytic effect, not an anxiogenic, an anxiolytic effect. So I think there's right now, I would say certainly for the cost of entry, if you are experiencing sleep problems, give it a shot.
They're quite cozy in the wintertime too.
They're cozy in the wintertime. I know people who swear by them. And don't forget, in the end, you're just after better sleep. As a scientist, I care, but you shouldn't, which is the placebo effect, which is the most reliable effect in all of pharmacology.
Yeah,
so
seriously.
Why not? Short of an adrenaline shot to the heart, but other than that, epinephrine, you're right up there.
That's amazing. Okay, so a bit of a curveball at you. So sex, or if you don't have a partner, I guess, what's a PC way that is to say, like
self-stimulation?
Yeah, waxing the dolphin, whatever, however you want to say it. Does that help you sleep?
Sitting across from the table has never been any more different than this moment in time, Kevin.
I was trying to say it in like a British way or something. Like, isn't that a term?
The dolphin and the wax. Yeah. Okay. I mean, we're moving on to probably hot wax on the nipples.
Okay.
Crashing on.
Okay.
Yes,
so
I think we all
we get the point now.
You're an absolute gem, Sarah.
we get the point. Does that help with sleep?
Yes and yes. So sex before sleep, as long as it is accomplishing orgasm, obviously, consensual, species appropriate, all of that good stuff. The benefits there are in the 60 to 70% improvement in subjective sleep quality. So sex before sleep that leads to an orgasm is typically associated with, on average, about a 60 to 70% improvement in the quality of your sleep that night.
You said subjective, though.
Subjective.
So that hasn't been studied in the lab?
Objective data because of probably the pragmatics of it being a bit more tricky to do in the laboratory. If you are not currently with partner, are you completely out of luck?
Right.
No, you're not.
That was my point about the dolphin.
Yeah, exactly. Self-stimulation with the wax and the dolphin, you can get about 40 to 50% of the way there with self-stimulation too, if it accomplishes orgasm.
Right.
And at that point, I mean, it's, you're making kind of money hand over fist in terms of the benefits for sleep.
I feel like this is a study Oura could do, or I mean, obviously it's a pretty...
it depends on how comfortable people are at times to say, I just masturbated myself to sleep tonight. A lot of people use masturbation as a sleep aid. Yeah. It's very clear that it's there.
That's crazy. Okay. That was a good one to get out there. How about...
no pun intended.
Yeah, seriously. Last question.
We are both wearing pants below this table, by the way.
That is correct. We were fully clothed if you're listening to the audio the version. That's right. What's a proper way? Someone's saying, okay, listen, I've tried a lot of these things. I'm still having issues here. Who do they reach out to, and how can they have a proper sleep study done? And is there any benefit to that? Like, if you brought someone into the lab, not to say it would be in your lab, but say more of a commercial lab for a sleep study around average consumers with issues, insomnia issues. If someone comes in and goes under and gets studied and they get a report, what are they going to learn that's any different than them just doing standard stress management and all the other things we talked about?
If it's insomnia, we typically don't do a sleep study.
Oh, interesting.
We can actually get for the most part, by taking a history and doing questionnaires, and then we'll get you to do a sleep diary and fill different things out. But insomnia is made in terms of its diagnosis, not by a sleep study itself. If it is about snoring, very much it is a sleep study. but usually it's an at-home sleep test.
And that's for apnea more.
And that's for apnea, that's for breathing-related problems.
Understood.
So that heavy snoring, which can be a representation of sleep apnea. If it's for something like restless leg syndrome that we spoke about, where you just get this kind of creepy, crawly feeling in your legs and you just have to move them and it's awful. People get in the triceps as well. It's just miserable. There we will typically do a sleep study where we bring you into the laboratory and we'll measure you with all of the electrodes and the wires. I don't know of any outfit right now that is doing it paid out of pocket. I've thought about this, though, because I think there is a growing trend of people wanting to be self-quantified. And there was, I won't name names just for privacy's sake, but a mutual friend, it turns out, of ours, and their sleep tracker was saying that they were not getting a lot of deep sleep.
Yeah, mine did that for a while too, until the algorithm was updated.
Worried. Now, one of them was the algorithm getting updated.
Yeah.
But we then said, okay, well, but you say that you're restored and you're fresh and you're a healthy person, no signs of, obesity or blood sugar problems that would be representative of a lack of deep sleep. So I sent a couple of my team out, and we've now got our spaghetti monster set of equipment now that is ambulatory. So we can go to people's home. We will just go to your home at your bedtime. We wire you up, and then we just kind of cast you off, and we go back to a hotel. You sleep the night, probably not great, but it's all about getting the brainwave activity data. It's not about getting the perfect night of sleep that is representative. Then the next morning, you tell us when you want us to be back. We come back, we take the electrodes off. And then we can do that a second night and a third night. And usually people don't tolerate much more than a third night. But that's enough data. And then we can go back to my laboratory and we deconstruct your brainwaves using all of our fancy in-house sort of algorithms and high processing computer power. And what we found was that, in fact, this person did have a deficiency. So when you go into deep sleep, you have these big, powerful, deep, slow brainwaves. And they're just gorgeous to see, huge synchronized brainwaves. Sure enough, on average, across the range of those deep sleep brainwaves, which go from as little as going up and down just half 0.5 hertz per second. So in other words, they're going up and down maybe just once every 2 seconds, very, very slow. Or just once every second, which is 1 hertz, or twice every second, which is 2 hertz. That's very, very slow brain activity. That's deep sleep. And sure enough, on average, the range that we have of deep sleep is 0.5 hertz to 4 hertz, 4 oscillations per second. Sure enough, on average, they had deficient deep sleep. But when we split it down in terms of individual bins, the 4 hertz bin, the 3 hertz bin, the 2 hertz, they had whopping amounts of ultra slow deep sleep brainwaves, which is in fact probably the best of all deep sleep brainwaves.
Interesting.
So they were a super deep sleep brainwave, as it were, but the ring was still summing across, the typical kind of range. And therefore, it wasn't the ring. It turns out it was a different sleep tracking device. But the sleep tracking device was kind of getting fooled, as we would be if we just broke your brainwaves down in a big bucket altogether. But if we really thin slice that bucket, we see you're not deficient at all. You are in the 98th percentile for the ultra slow of the slow brainwaves. You are radically healthy. You're great. So that's why I think there can be benefits. And I think if there are sleep curious folks out there, I have thought about probably, and I should do this, because again, I think it's best done with good science, is setting up a company. And it's usually, to begin with, it's not going to be democratically available because it's going to be high cost. So it's going to be concierge kind of medicine, white glove treatment. You want us to do a sleep study. You want us to break down all of your data. You want us to tell you where do you sit relative to the globe, because we've now got hundreds of thousands of hours of data on sleep recordings. We can say, where are you for your age, for your sex, in what percentile do you rank for all of the different sleep stages? And it's basically just like me giving you a sleep bio assessment. I think there's probably a market for that.
There's definitely a market for that, because we do that already. I mean, so as a part of a TIA's group, we'll do VO2 max testing and then retesting. We'll do DEXA scan for bone density testing and then retesting every year. Like there's something to be said about having that baseline so that we can track it over time and see what's changing. And then also, if you're doing any interventions, you can jump in and say, did this have an impact one way or the other, right?
Right. And also just temporally tracking your decline in sleep. If we've done some studies where if you're rapidly declining in your deep sleep at a sharp angle, it's not a good sign in terms of dementia risk.
Right.
Now, there's people like Richard Isaacson at the Einstein Institute in New York who are developing some really radical new anti-Alzheimer's disease, lifestyle and supplement treatment and exercise regimens and kind of programs.
Right.
So if we can already see like a crystal ball, the prediction power of your sleep declining because we're doing this service for you every 2 years, and you probably wouldn't need to do it more than every 2 years.
Yeah.
All of a sudden then, crystal ball-like, we can instigate prevention rather than late-stage treatment. I think there is big value, and I should probably bite the bullet, and it's yet another thing I should probably do.
You need a full staff.
Yeah.
An even bigger staff. So let's talk real quick before we wrap, your brain stimulation device and where you think the state of brain stimulation is on sleep.
I am really bullish about brain stimulation in general. I think this is a new approach. As I said, that when I was writing the book, there was just very nascent data.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to sort of go too much on record. So I have created a new startup company. It's called StimScience.com, and you can go there, and we've released our first product. I think there are at least 3 new modalities for non-pharmacological enhancement of human sleep. One is electricity, and we're trying to do that with this company. And as I said, we've got our first gen product out there. I think we still need a lot more data. If I were, leading the company, which would be a disaster because I'm a scientist, I would probably wait for 10 years of, 1 million hours of sleep data before I released a product. And then at that point, 20 other companies have already beaten you to it. So I get releasing early. So electricity is one way that we're doing it, which is creating electroceuticals rather than pharmaceuticals. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's definitely an approach that I'm invested in, both in terms of time and scientifically. I think the next one is acoustic stimulation. And there's some really interesting data that if you start to play acoustic sounds at that slow brain rhythm, so maybe just like 0.5 hertz or just 1 hertz. So in other words, you just hear this like throb of a sound every second. That's a 1 hertz throb. Mm-hmm. And then boom, 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 boom. If you do that and you just start playing it, there was a study that came out of Germany, and they showed that it does improve the speed with which you fall asleep. And it seemed to increase the amount of deep sleep just statistically significantly. The problem is that that's not a very smart way to do it, nor is it with electricity. That's the way that they used to do it with the initial studies, that they would actually just start, once you went into deep sleep, they just started stimulating the brain at the average slow brainwave frequency, let's say 2 hertz. Mm-hmm. But the problem is your sweet spot of deep slow wave brainwave activity may be 1.257 hertz. Mine may be 3.29 hertz. So now we've developed a closed loop system where we're measuring your brainwaves, and then we're stimulating you right at the stroke of midnight for your particular next brainwave. So think of it like this. Let's say that I say to you, you're a drummer, and I want you to drum just like a salsa beat for me. And you kind of think, okay, I kind of know the general tempo of a salsa beat. So I'll just start to create. Now, it turns out that in the next room, I'm trying to see if you're matching this particular salsa track. And you're close, but you're not quite there. Right. Why? Because you're ignorant of what the actual beat is.
Right.
That was the early sort of version of all of this, of acoustic stimulation, of electrical stimulation. You're kind of guesstimating to say, on average, the brain is going up and down at this oscillation.
Right.
So let's give sound at that kind of average sweet spot, or electricity at that average sweet spot. But now we can measure real time the brain waves. and we can predict when the next one is coming, and we can strike it right when we think it's going to happen.
Via what device?
So we actually have, for our device, it's called a transcranial direct current brain stimulator. So it's not magnetism, it's electricity. So TDCS, transcranial direct current stimulation, it's basically just current, electricity, inputted through your cranium, and it's a movement through our electrodes into your brain, hence the trans part of the But we have electrodes on there too. So we're inputting and we're listening. We input and we listen. Hence, it's a closed
system. Is this working?
It's working. So we have an algorithm.
So what consumer device is this?
It's called Somnee.
Oh, so this is what Somnee's doing?
Correct.
Okay, I never knew the science behind Somnee.
The clever part, it's not clever if it was me, but we don't typically want to wear these things. So it turns out that when we developed a version of the stimulation, once we took the stimulation off your head, it kept on going for about 2 hours. It has a blast radius of about 90 minutes to 2 hours. So think of it like a child on a swing. They're waving their legs and the swing is not moving. But you as a parent, you start swinging them and you swing them and you're building up the momentum, and then you stop swinging them and they keep swinging because you've got momentum.
Right.
That's the approach that we took, which was very different. That's what differentiates us in the market.
Interesting.
So you're brushing your teeth for 10 minutes or you're lying in bed. You just kind of, you can listen to a meditation track while you do it, and you just have the stimulation. So this is me now swinging your brain artificially, and then we stop, and then we just see if your brain gets going just like the child on the swing. Or a better way would be, I'm trying to fertilize the soil of your prefrontal cortex, which is where we generate most of our deep sleep, so that when you go into sleep, the soil is that much more fertilized and you germinate much more powerful deep sleep brainwaves. And you don't have to wear it during sleep, because most of us don't want to wear it.
I'm kind of confusing, because like you're not seeing you're not actually having a closed loop on the deep sleep frequencies.
We are, because when we're stimulating, we're measuring your brainwaves during that 10 minutes as you're brushing your teeth. And we're trying to then almost trying to fight back against the fast frenetic brain activity. And we are still trying to essentially read out your brain activity during the stimulation.
Sure, but that's not going to be deep sleep activity.
Well, but what we can do is we can essentially be we're pushing you towards that. We're essentially saying...
So you know what the ramp looks like.
Correct.
And so you're like, hey, I'm going to hit you at this second inning where we know where we're going.
Yeah, so we can't give away exactly what frequencies we use, but they're not actually quite the deep sleep frequencies. So it's like me saying, I'm going to help you row through the gears to get onto the on-ramp once you hit, highway cruising speed.
Okay.
And we're the people who are going to give you a helping hand to move through that H-box pattern of the gears nice and smoothly. We're getting you onto the on-ramp in a quicker manner. And then once you're at cruising speed, take it off and you're good to go.
That's amazing.
So there's that electricity, there's acoustic stimulation, which I think is great. Then came on the scene kinesthetic stimulation. Why we didn't think of this so long ago, I don't know, because you can go back in biblical readings, and what would people do to get a child to sleep? They would typically rock them in a manger.
Right.
Or, if your baby is awake and you're trying to get them to sleep, you usually typically take them in your arms and you just start kind of like rocking them.
You wrap them tight.
You kind of like rock them.
Yeah, well, they sell devices that literally auto rock the baby.
They will rock. And all of a sudden, why is this working? Why have we known this as a human species? And what is the speed with which we typically rock? It turns out to be almost at the sweet spot of deep, slow brainwave activity. You start rocking them really quickly, it's a disaster. If you just rock them really slowly.
Yeah, my mom used to rock me to sleep in a rocking chair, actually, as a child. Yeah.
And my guess is that the frequency with which she would rock you is very similar to the brainwave. So this is another one of those studies where I reviewed the paper and I just, why didn't I think of that? It gets back to, it's not too far from the waxing.
Wait, so how does it work? So you have to get a bed that's rocking me?
Well, so it's not too far from the waxing of the dolphin, but it's a little bit more, it's close. So what you do is you get a bed frame and you get chains and you chain the bed frame to the ceiling. Now, so we're kind of moving down we've gone from dolphin to sort of the BDSM, but now what they did was they put a little arm pushing device next to it, which was connected to a pulley.
Right.
And that arm would start to rotate the bed at actually a very slow frequency at about 0.25 hertz. So it's actually only rocking once every 4 seconds.
Crazy.
So it's a very slow rock. And sure enough, it enhanced the amount of deep sleep that those people were getting. It improved something that we also call sleep spindles, which are these short bursts that ride like surfers on top of the deep, slow brainwaves. And those two things combined, we know help memory. And sure enough, in one of their studies, that deep sleep enhancement through rocking improved memory by about 10%. And you think, well, 10%. What's? But
are you kidding me? 10% is amazing.
If you took a test as a kid in school, and you kind of got a C plus, and I say I'm now going to just give you an extra 10%, you're solidly in B territory.
Yeah.
I'll take 10%. That's not bad at all. So
when you move this to the consumer application, could you embed? I would take it. You obviously get rid of all the chains and everything else, and you embed this inside of some type of floating apparatus in a bed frame.
Company has done it.
No way.
And they put little feet on the stands of your bed that sit on the floor, and those feet are programmed Wi-Fi. But they've got they're motorized. Plug into your phone, and you can determine the rocking frequency.
Does it work?
And it rocks. No data.
What's the name of it?
I don't even know if the company still exists anymore. I can't even remember the company.
Oh, man.
But I clearly got no affiliation. But I don't know about that one. I don't think it's going to create. I mean, if you looked at the distance traveled with this rocking method versus these little feet that kind of do like maybe a couple of inches, it's probably not going to be. There is. So I wanted to try to do this too. It's a crazy idea, and I took a patent out, and I've never transacted on it. There is a device that you can put in the ear, and it will stimulate the vestibular system in the ear. And it can. That's why sometimes you'll get seasickness, and when you get back on land, because you've been stimulating this kind of vestibular system,
and you still feel like things are moving.
You still feel like things are moving.
Yeah.
So through this stimulation device, I can fool your brain into thinking you are rocking at any frequency I like, but you're not. You're dead still in bed, but your brain thinks that you're rocking and that you're swinging.
Have you tried this in?
I haven't even created a version of the technology. No,
I
just thought, you know what, I'll take the patent out, and then at some point, so I'm terrible. I've got so many ideas coming out, all sorts of orifices that will never get transacted. But anyway,
I love it. This has been fun. Awesome.
You're such a brilliant interviewer. You're so natural.
Please.
You're so good.
You've got all the amazing accent. I just have the dolphin.
Shy of the dolphins. I think it wasn't too bad at all. No. We absolutely have to keep.
Awesome. So I do want to say a couple of things. Obviously, Matt Walker podcast, definitely go sign up for that.
Thank you.
Where else we gave people, link them up in the show notes to a lot of the relevant stuff we talked about today, including the whywesleep.org.
Yep. That's where so I started, as I said, a new public charity, the goal of which is to try to solve the global sleep loss epidemic by way of funded science, and also by way of sleep education. I think I have done a completely bookshot approach to trying to educate society in terms of sleep. I need to do it in a formal manner, and we're going to create this foundation, this trust, this public foundation, and we're going to create a team, and we're going to start banging out some really great informational content. For example, I know of no first world government that has ever had a public health campaign regarding sleep. We have them for safe sex, drink driving. We have them for food, for movement. Why don't we have it for sleep? I think it's a travesty, and we're going to provide that to governments. The World Health Organization spoke with them. They don't have a basic sleep educational module for different age ranges that is translated into 37 different languages. Why not? It's a basic human right. Every species will go through it. Every child will sleep. We should be educating them. Where are the materials for teachers to teach it in the classroom? We don't have those too. Why don't we lobby Congress to make changes in terms of resident work hours for medical professions? This is the type of mission that we have at the foundation. If anyone wants to get behind that, please reach out either to me personally, or you can go to whywesleep.org. That is our mission as a foundation.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're so welcome. It is just a privilege. It's lovely to hang out with you again.
It's good to hang.
It's just great chatting on mic too, always.